Hey, if you've been watching my videos for a little while, you've probably heard me talk about how so often we read the Bible with a 20th, 21st century Christian perspective versus looking at it from its original Jewish roots. And a lot of times, because of that, we will misunderstand what's said or miss the point entirely. Well, last night, actually this morning, in my Bible reading, my normal devotions, I came across a passage that is a perfect example and illustration of this. And thought I would share it with you just so you could kind of see how a lot of times we may completely miss what the Bible is actually saying because we're missing the background and the roots and the historical perspective. So let me start off with 1 Peter chapter 4. And there's a passage here where Peter is talking. Now, this whole section of First Peter, the whole entire book of First Peter, is a letter that Peter has written to the Jewish believers. He's writing it from Rome, but it's very, very clear throughout this whole entire letter that he's writing to the Jewish believers, to the Jewish followers. In fact, even from the very first verses, he says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. So right off the bat, this is the Jewish people because they are the exiles, the dispersion. That's who his audience is. And in everything throughout this whole letter, he's continually referring to them as the Jewish believers. They're Jews. And then he comes up to this passage at the end of chapter 4, verse 15. 15 to 17 here. And this will just let me read to you. It says, but let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is the time of judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Now, normally, what many of us do is we look at this and we say, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed. We should be happy to suffer as Christians. Suffering as a Christian is a good thing, and and we kind of take it from there that being a Christian and suffering because you're a Christian, and we miss the point. If you look at the line before, Peter has actually said Jesus. Yeah, well, it's Jesus through Peter. He says, let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer as a meddler. Don't be known as those things. These are not what we are. We should not be known as that. Don't let those names be attached to you because of what you do. This is what we avoid. So we don't want to be known as those. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian under this other label, and we kind of go, well, okay, the others are bad, but this one's good. It's actually not what he's saying. In fact, the original Greek word here, Christianos, is only used in one other place in the New Testament. The whole New Testament, only one other place. And that's actually in Acts chapter 26, verse 28. So let me read this to you. This is Paul on trial here. And it actually reads, I can get my right verse here. Verse 27. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. So Paul is on trial here before King Agrippa, trying to convince him that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Messiah, that they're not a cult, that they're sincere and good in their beliefs. And King Agrippa says to Paul in verse 28, in a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? Now again, we read this 21st century view. Oh, Paul's trying to convince him to be a Christian. The believers at this time did not call themselves Christians. They did not use that word in applying to themselves at all. It was a mockery. It was a slang term applied to them by people who didn't believe. Oh, them Christians. I don't want to be a Christian. I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage. They didn't call themselves that. They called themselves followers of the way. And many of them were good Jews. They did not like the name Christian. So when King Agrippa is talking to Paul, are you trying to convince me to be a Christian? Ew, disgusting. It's derisive. It's almost vulgar. It's just not a word anybody wants applied to themselves. And so when King Agrippa is using it to Paul, it's almost a slanderous term. You don't want to be that. So when Peter is talking again back in First Peter, he isn't saying it's a good thing to be a Christian because of the connotation of the word. Really, modern Jews' idea of the word of Christian really isn't that far off of the biblical definition of it. They have a very horrible connotation of it because of the pogroms, because of the Inquisition, because of the Crusades, because of the Holocaust. There's been a lot of persecution and anti-Semitism done in the name of Christian. It's not a good word for them. And it's the same thing here. Peter is saying, look, you don't want to be attached to any of these. But you know what? If somebody attaches this horrible term of Christian on us, they don't mean it nicely. They don't mean it well. We don't use it towards ourselves. We don't like it. But you know what? If they are going to throw that term on us and call us a Christian, let's not be ashamed of that. Instead, let's use it to glorify God. In this case, it's almost like, oh, you're too honest for your own good. You goody two-shoes. It's not meant nicely. But Peter's saying, you know what? We know what they really mean. It's not nice. It's not kind. It's not good. But in this case, we'll own it anyways. And let's use it as a means to represent what God is in spite of the term being attached to us. We don't want to be known as murderers. Absolutely not. We don't want to be known as thieves or evildoers or as meddlers. These are all horrible things. And while they intend the word Christian to be on the same level as those, you know what? In this case, let's let it actually give us an opportunity to show them what a follower of Yeshua, what a follower of the way really is. Our modern 21st deal, we miss it. We're like, oh, this is cool. He's telling us it's wonderful. And really, it's almost the opposite of that. He's saying, yeah, in spite of what they're saying about us. And yet, at the same time, if you are aware of what many people say today about those who call themselves Christians, it's almost the same way. It's almost to a point where, because of the connotation that so many have in regards to Christians and born-again Christians, if you read online, if you go to any of the religious discussion at all on Reddit, for example, the word Christian, somebody who calls themselves a Christian, is just opening themselves up to attack because they're these horrible, hypocritical, mean-spirited, arrogant, rude people. And unfortunately, let's be honest, a lot of times that's what people who've called themselves Christians are. It is a term that we've basically taken what was a slang term back then, and we fulfilled it, not in a good way. In fact, I actually, a lot of times, I try not to use the word for myself. I use it among people who are looking for that word. But if I'm going to be talking to a non-believer, I don't call myself a Christian a lot of times. I say that I'm a follower of Jesus. I say I'm a man of faith. I use other words because Christians so often really aren't what they think they are. But it's again a good example of why we need to look at the Bible not with modern eyes, but to be willing to dig into the historical perspective. That one passage again in First Peter, all of First Peter is it's specifically written to the Jewish people. Here's the things that we need to know as Jewish followers of Yeshua. Here's the words that we need to cling to. The Old Testament prophecies have been fulfilled. We know that as good Jewish followers that we do these things. And if we get called a Christian, he's not writing to people we would think of as Christians. He's writing to Jewish followers of their Messiah. And we would miss that whole thing if we just pull that one verse out and try to use today's words for it. So I encourage you, when you're reading your Bible, dig into the history of it. Many of your study Bibles, you can see the big old fat ones here, they have a very nice introduction that will give you a lot of background information and a lot of that type of news, so you can actually understand who's writing it, where they're writing to, what the circumstances are. I encourage you to read that because it'll give you a better underlying feel for what's going on. But don't hesitate to look into the Jewish culture of the time that Jesus lived, because it'll give you a different view of what's there, and you're much more likely to understand what Jesus is really saying to us through what's written in here versus what so often we think he's saying and we misinterpret. So, just a little insight, a little look for you. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'd love to hear more from you too. Don't forget to comment below. Thanks so much, and God bless.